engagement. Lee Anne, you've got 20 minutes, and we'll have 5-minute opportunity to ask some questions. You can, over to you, you can go on. Thank you.
Thank you. So good morning once again, colleagues. Today I'll be presenting my proposal for transforming curricula for multicultural student engagement. This is some research that emanated from my attendance of the SOTL program. So the campaign to decolonize the curriculum at South African universities began about 6 years ago. Yet many higher education academics still do not know what this means for their curriculum design and teaching approach. Transformation within higher education is perceived from different perspectives, including the undoing of inaccessibility and underrepresentativeness within higher education, focusing on independence in acquiring knowledge, skills, values, and beliefs, and debunking the idea that Western and European knowledge is superior. Moreover, it is perceived that decolonizing the curriculum would be difficult, if not impossible, particularly because some curricula are informed by external entities, such as by professional bodies, while others are strongly rooted in the sciences. In addition, there are perceptions that decolonization means the destruction of the current curriculum, but it is more a process than an event. Arguably, there is no single way to decolonize a curriculum, and we therefore need to find contemporary ways of addressing decolonization. So there are divergent views on what it means to decolonize the curriculum. For example, there is the stance that transformation of the curriculum means the reconstruction of the epistemological model, where epistemologies serve where African epistemologies serve a foundational role in education. On the other hand, there is the view that the curriculum should use the best knowledge and skills from around the world, because knowledge systems essentially coexist and influence each other. But what is apparent is that transformation is a process with an end goal that is not yet clear. There is no one-size-fits-all solutions for institutions of higher education. However, perhaps we should reflect on how the curriculum is brought across to students. Academics could focus on who their students are and where they come from to understand their social and cultural context. And as such, integration to a student's socio-cultural context could be applied in the way that the content is brought across. So it is therefore proposed that to integrate indigenous knowledge with the existing curricula, it must be determined how to bring the outside indigenous knowledge and cultural, social, and political contexts in which it is located closer to the inside colonized curriculum. So knowledge recontextualization rules can play an integral part in the transformation of education for both the globalization and the decolonization of curricula. Recontextualization creates the conditions for the integration of knowledge to occur. So from a decolonization perspective, debates on curriculum transformation have tended to focus on identifying whose knowledge is foregrounded and which social powers have more influence on curricula. However, it is proposed that to advance the transformation agenda, it would be worthwhile to explore how knowledge forms enable or constrain knowledge building. Most educational theoretical frameworks, whether applied to explore processes of learning or to redress social injustices, have treated knowledge building as a generic process and knowledge as homogeneous. But what is needed is a lens that focuses on the ways and the contexts of knowing. So I therefore propose that the autonomy dimension of legitimation code theory can indicate how this can be achieved. So the autonomy can be used to explore the phenomenon of integration of knowledge through concepts of positional and relational autonomy. These concepts help to explore the boundaries that are created for a given practice, for its knowledge constituents, and for relations between these constituents. Positional autonomy is expressed as stronger or weaker distinctions between the constituents positioned within a context and those positioned in other contexts. Relational autonomy is expressed as stronger or weaker in terms of being autonomous or heteronymous on the basis of the principles governing how these constituents relate together. So varying the two strengths is based on what is valued for a given context. Levels of integration are enacted when recontextualization of knowledge practices are positioned in and move between autonomy codes called pathways. And unless the correct autonomy pathways are enacted, knowledge will remain segmented. So the contention is that integration is not merely achieved by bringing together knowledge and knowledge practices. There should be conscious and appropriate selection, repurpose, and connection through appropriate autonomy pathways. And it is thus proposed that herein lies the opportunity for exploring curriculum transformation, because the concept of autonomy can help to determine when social and cultural integration can be achieved. So the framework of the autonomy concept was adapted for my study to present a conceptual framework. Knowledge within the sovereign code is academic knowledge as it currently exists, which is Eurocentric. The interjected code would arguably constitute knowledge which exists outside the current curriculum, or African knowledge, which is not addressed in the curriculum at present. The projected code would constitute whatever knowledge students are exposed to when they leave university. In other words, the application of that knowledge is the projected code. So to determine the autonomy codes within the context of this study, or in other words, to determine what is being insulated, was achieved using a generic translation device for autonomy codes. The translation device is a framework for researchers to develop a specific translation device that can aid in the translation of the data that is specific to their context. So the core syllabus for the selected subject that was the focus of the study is the core target knowledge constituent, and the target purpose of the subject is determined by the outcomes of the subject, which is often subdivided into units of learning. Other units of learning or other academic knowledge would be ancillary target constituents. And using academic knowledge for different purposes would be ancillary target purposes. Non-target constituents include associated knowledge, which is other African knowledge for academic purposes, and unassociated knowledge would constitute knowledge from beyond education or beyond the educational context. So the intention of this research was essentially to determine if decolonization of the curriculum was addressed in a selected subject, and this would essentially be achieved by exploring the appropriate pathways to integrate the curriculum with the students' sociocultural context through a process of knowledge recontextualization. This was a qualitative study drawing on data collected from curriculum documentation of a selected business subject at a University of Technology. This subject was purposefully sampled because it is a subject with a close relationship to the knowledge base of the discipline, but which also has the potential for strong community linkages. The documentation analyzed included content knowledge in the form of notes, texts, and other relevant content, teaching and learning methods, the subject outcomes, as well as the assessment instruments. Now, while ordinarily document analysis is used with other qualitative research methods for triangulation, in some cases, it might be the only necessary source of data for studies that are particularly designed with an interpretive paradigm. Furthermore, the focus was not on how many documents are selected for analysis, but on the quality of the documents in terms of providing the requisite evidence. I applied content analysis to identify the emergent themes of the translation device for the given teaching context, using the selected documents which serve to corroborate the teaching, learning, and assessment practices employed within the subject, and therefore suitably making the documents a primary source of data. Lastly, content and thematic analysis was used to determine if knowledge integration was achieved by following the sequence of the delivery of one unit of learning, thereby tracing the pathways created by the teaching, learning, and assessment activities. So each phase of the unit of learning is technically segmented because it occurs during different timeframes, and therefore the evaluation of the pathways was split into various phases of the unit of learning. I have selected 2 phases to illustrate how the pathways were traced using the specific translation device as a lens. So we will start with tracing the pathways of the pre-lesson activities, which included pre-reading, watching YouTube videos, and completing a computer-based assessment. The unit of learning that was selected focuses largely on the historical development of the Constitution, basic constitutional concepts, and constitutional sources and values, among others. And the select focus of this unit of learning was understanding the concept of citizenship. Now, the prescribed texts utilized for the unit of learning are selected chapters from the Constitution and the prescribed textbook, as well as case law. The prescribed texts constitute target constituents for the selected subject. Students must read the prescribed texts in preparation for their lesson to learn the concepts of the unit of learning. So this means that they are using the academic knowledge for academic purposes. This is a target principle for relating constituents. So the unit of learning starts deep in the sovereign code, which is represented by point 1 in the figure. The YouTube videos were specifically designed to explain the legal concepts and it was explained using generic day-to-day knowledge. The knowledge constituent is an unassociated target constituent because it does not necessarily draw on sociocultural dynamics from a community. And the purpose of the videos is to teach the legal concepts. So it is actually a target principle for relating constituents. So the unit of learning now moves to the interjected code. Students subsequently complete a computer-based assessment. It serves as a preemptive assessment of learning, which must align to the outcomes of the unit of learning, therefore making it a core target constituent. The feedback from these formative assessments serve a diagnostic role, so it helps lecturers to decide on the appropriate teaching and learning activities. And the purpose of this assessment is actually not a means to determine the student's degree of mastery of the learning outcomes. So it's actually not utilized in the traditional sense, which would be assessment for and of learning. So it therefore serves an ancillary target purpose. The unit of learning now takes a turn back to the sovereign code, but because it is an ancillary target purpose, it's not a deep shift into the sovereign code. A deep shift would, of course, represent alignment to the course syllabus and learning outcomes specifically. The second phase that I've selected to illustrate how the pathways were traced is the first lesson after the pre-lesson activities. So the lesson is on constitutional law and citizenship, and it starts with an activity where students individually reflect on what their understanding is of a citizen. They subsequently share their views during the class reflection, and in this sense, the lesson then doesn't start with providing the student with any theoretical standpoint on the concept. So there's no link to the core academic knowledge yet. The knowledge they will draw on is the knowledge that they have developed through personal experience, which essentially is African knowledge. This makes the student's knowledge a non-target associated constituent. The purpose of the activity is for students to reflect on their pre-existing ideas of the concept and for the lecturer to obtain a view of what the students know about the concept. So the target purpose is associated. The lesson starts by taking the unit of learning into just within the exotic code. The lecturer proceeds with the lesson to discuss psychological development to further explore the concept of a citizen through the lenses of Maslow's hierarchy of needs and Barrett's 7 levels of consciousness. These frameworks are not part of the core syllabus of the subject, but is academic knowledge nonetheless. They are utilized by the lecturer to provide a theoretical underpinning of psychological development, but does not relate to the constitutional standpoint and therefore represents an ancillary core target constituent. The lecturer has not yet related the explanation of the 2 frameworks to the concept of citizenship, and thus the purpose of the discussion of the frameworks is still mainly to discuss psychological development. This means that the target purpose is ancillary. And so the unit of learning now moves to just within the sovereign code. An exercise of reflection follows, which requires that the students consult the Sunday Times Top 100 Songs that influenced the nation. And this resource is supplied to them by the lecturer. Students must select one song which they relate to and determine why that song resonates with them. The Sunday Times Top 100 Songs do not reflect academic knowledge nor knowledge from a strictly African context. The knowledge is an unassociated, non-target constituent. While the purpose, however, is not teaching the concept of a citizen from a course syllabus standpoint. So that makes it an associated, non-target purpose. So the unit of learning now moves back to the exotic code. Sorry, deeper than the last trip into the exotic code, given the very weakly insulated position. Finally, the students reflect on what they value as an individual in respect of material things, intellect, social aspects, religion, and also their spirituality. Here, the focus is moving back to the students' African knowledge based on their personal views, opinions, experiences, which of course is shaped by their sociocultural contexts. So this makes the non-target and constituent ancillary non-target. The lecturer then continues to take students via this explorative journey of reflection, thus making it a non-target associated purpose. The unit of learning stays within the exotic code, but moves to just within this code, given the more strongly insulated position toward academic knowledge. Finally, the lesson concludes when students are provided with a homework exercise, which requires them to rank themselves on Maslow's hierarchy of needs and Barrett's levels of consciousness. So, just as a reminder, the analysis provided here was merely a snapshot of the overall analysis for the selected unit of learning, but it served to illustrate how the pathways were traced, and in doing so, revealed the following findings. Each phase of the unit of learning is technically segmented because it occurs during different time frames. So you will have seen that the pre-lesson activity started and ended in the sovereign code. However, the lesson starts in the exotic code, moves to the sovereign code, and then back to the exotic code, where it stays for the remainder of the lesson. So it is actually unlikely that integration has occurred because each phase of the unit of learning must return to the sovereign code to ensure that knowledge is not left segmented before the next phase of the unit of learning. And therefore, bringing it back to the sovereign code will support integration. In addition, integration is only achieved when the pathway moves deep into the sovereign code, because a move to just within the sovereign code does not bring the content and purpose back to the core syllabus. While the exotic code can support student engagement and understanding, it does not necessarily bring about decolonization of the curriculum. It could, however, be used to scaffold the level of engagement. The aim essentially is to recontextualize and then, of course, before decontextualizing again. So it will therefore enable students to build on previous knowledge and understanding, and also enabling cumulative and adaptable knowledge building. There also must be pathways within a curriculum to move from the sovereign code to the interjected code by introducing content which is influenced by indigenous knowledge. The selection of content must also align to weaker positional autonomy via associated indigenous knowledge. And the purpose must maintain strong relational autonomy just to ensure that that integration occurs through the recontextualization process. Lastly, I found that these findings therefore uphold the contention that the appropriate autonomy pathways to bring about decolonization of the curriculum can only be achieved through the conscious and appropriate selection and repurpose of knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lee Anne. That's really powerful way of engagement with curriculum. Colleagues, give you an opportunity to ask questions. What's happening now? Can you hear me, Lee Anne?
Should I share the presentation again?
No, I'm saying I'm opening up opportunity for colleagues to ask questions. Yeah, thank you very much.
I'll check the chat. Thank you.
Sure. Colleagues, any question? I don't seem to be getting questions, Lee Anne, but I think for me, because fortunately I had some kind of an opportunity to read through your work, I think that's a very interesting work, and I'm looking forward to see it coming to fruition. But just quickly, I mean, I want to check if you have also explored some decolonial work on law, and in particular constitution, and what other scholars are saying with regard to decolonization.
So I haven't specifically focused on the law context because I was looking at a genetic standpoint as it relates to curricula. Of course, I know you and I have had the conversation about whether this is strictly decolonization. There are, of course, divergent views on what decolonization would entail. I can reference Jonathan Jansen's book on decolonization in universities, for example. Would decolonization be a complete reconstruction of the epistemological model, or would it just improve epistemological access? So I am exploring these differences, and so I think I need to take it back to that comparison. But I do think that at least this research can, contribute to the dialogue on improving access while we do consider how to reconstruct the underlying epistemological model. But yeah, just to specifically come back to your question, I think that to focus on law specifically, because that's not my area of expertise. It was a selection of a subject based on, what I knew was occurring in that subject. And so I thought that it could actually just add value to the analysis. I'm actually in information systems, so but I think that it just proves that it can be applied to any context. It's just about us reflecting on our curricula and how we approach it.
Sure. No, I think that's a very wonderful work. I really encourage you to explore it further and further look at what the decolonial scholars are saying with regard to law. I know people are arguing that there might be various contentions as to what decoloniality means, but there is agreement around the whole notion around being, or the ontological being of those that were marginalized. So how is the analysis enabling people to reclaim that being? I think should be the focus. I think you can explore that using the very same tools, but looking at what they are saying, and then you look at how the tools can be used to explore that issue around ontological being. But thank you very much.
Thank you, CS.
Thank you.